The sterile scent of disinfectant, the rhythmic beep of monitors, and the low hum of unseen machinery were my constant companions. For 6 days, they had been the soundtrack to my purgatory. I sat beside my father's bed in the ICU, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, an artificial rhythm dictated by a machine. His once vibrant face, usually creased with laughter lines, was now a pale, unsettling mask, slack and unresponsive. I was Sarah, 45, a woman who prided herself on knowing her family, especially her father, inside and out. He was Arthur Miller, a respected pillar of our small suburban community, a man who built his life brick by brick, always dependable, always present. He was my rock, my unwavering North Star. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't even begin to fathom, was that the man lying before me, fighting for every breath, had been living a life I knew nothing about. His secrets were about to unravel, not through a deathbed confession, but through the accidental intrusion of a stranger, a man who would shatter my carefully constructed reality with every word. The hospital room itself felt like a cage, albeit a necessary one. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow, making the long nights feel even longer, blurring the line between exhaustion and reality. My shoulders ached from tension, my eyes burned from lack of sleep, and a dull throb behind my temples had become a permanent resident. My mother, bless her heart, had tried to take shifts, but her own grief kept her on a short leash, unable to truly face the man she'd loved for over 50 years in such a vulnerable state. My brother, Michael, lived 3 states away, always offering platitudes and distant support, but rarely making the physical trek unless absolutely necessary. So, it was me. Always me. The dutiful daughter. My father, Arthur, had always been a man of routine, a creature of habit. Every morning he'd read the newspaper with his coffee, every Sunday he'd mow the lawn, and every summer he'd take my mother to the Outer Banks. His life was an open book, or so I believed. He'd built a successful small construction company, Miller & Sons, though Michael never truly took to the sons part, preferring a career in finance. Dad had always accepted it gracefully, never pushing. He was good, kind, steady. He was Arthur. I remembered the day the call came, sharp and piercing, cutting through the mundane hum of my afternoon. It was my mother, her voice thin and ragged. "Sarah, it's your father. He collapsed. Heart attack. They're taking him to St. Jude's." The world had tilted on its axis then, and it hadn't righted itself since. Now, watching him, hooked up to a tangle of tubes and wires, my heart felt like a shriveled thing in my chest. If you were in my shoes, if you watched the strongest man you knew reduced to this fragile state, you'd understand the profound helplessness, the chilling fear that permeated every single breath you took. The nurses were kind, offering hushed words of comfort and bringing me lukewarm coffee. Dr. Evans, a man with tired eyes and a gentle demeanor, explained my father's condition in medical jargon that mostly blurred into a frightening hum. Severe cardiac event, extensive damage, low chances. Each update was a fresh stab, a reminder of the precipice we were teetering on. I held his hand, cold and lifeless in mine, whispering stories from my childhood, silly anecdotes, anything to fill the silence and perhaps, just perhaps, reach him. I wanted to tell him how much I loved him, how much I admired him, how much I needed him to come back. But the words felt hollow in the face of his silence. I often wondered if he could hear me, if some part of him was still tethered to this world, listening to my voice. I talked about his grandkids, about the rose bushes he cherished in the backyard, even about the latest town gossip, hoping a familiar sound might penetrate the fog. My mother would visit in the afternoons, her eyes swollen, her hands trembling. She'd sit for an hour, pat his hand, and then gently kiss his forehead before retreating, unable to bear the sight for too long. "He's always been so strong, Sarah," she'd whisper, her voice thick with unshed tears. I don't know what I'd do without him. I'd just nod, feeling the weight of her unspoken fear settle on my own shoulders. The nights were the hardest. Everyone else was gone, and it was just me and the machines. The hospital staff changed shifts, their footsteps echoing softly down the hallway. Sometimes I'd drift off, only to be jolted awake by a sudden change in a monitor's rhythm, my heart leaping into my throat. The fear was a living entity, coiling around me, squeezing tighter with each passing hour. I'd grab my phone, scrolling through old photos of my father, vibrant and laughing, a stark contrast to the frail figure in the bed. He was the man who taught me how to change a tire, how to negotiate a fair price, how to stand up for myself. He was everything I knew. It was around 3 a.m, a particularly dark and lonely hour when the world feels suspended between night and dawn. I was dozing in the uncomfortable armchair, my head lolling against the back, when I heard a soft creak. My eyes snapped open, instantly alert. The door to my father's room, which I usually kept slightly ajar for the nurses, was slowly swinging open. A figure stood silhouetted against the dim hallway light, stooped and hesitant. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice raspy from disuse. The figure shuffled forward, slowly revealing himself. He was an elderly man, perhaps in his late 70s or early 80s, with a shock of wispy white hair and a deeply lined face. He wore a faded blue bathrobe over pajamas, and his movements were slow, almost fragile. His eyes, though slightly clouded with age, held a surprising warmth and a hint of confusion. "Oh, excuse me," he murmured, his voice soft and raspy, a gentle sigh more than a statement. "I seem to have lost my way. I was looking for room 214. They said it was just down the hall. I glanced at the door. We were in room 212. "You're close," I told him, trying to smile reassuringly. "Just 2 doors down." He nodded slowly, his gaze sweeping over the room, taking in the machines, the tubes, and then finally, my father. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Recognition, perhaps? Or just the shock of seeing another person in such a dire state. "Oh dear," he whispered, a genuine sadness in his voice. He took another step into the room, leaning on a polished wooden cane. Is this Arthur?" My blood ran cold. How did he know my father's name? I'd never seen this man before in my life. Our small town was not that small, but it was close-knit enough that most people knew each other, especially those who had lived there for decades. And yet, this man was a complete stranger. "Yes," I answered, my voice suddenly wary. "He is. Do I know you?" The old man shook his head slowly, his gaze still fixed on my father's unconscious form. "No, I don't believe we've ever met, dear. My name is Walter Henderson. I'm just a patient here, recovering from a minor procedure. They usually let me walk the halls a bit to keep my spirits up. But sometimes I get a little turned around." He chuckled, a dry, reedy sound, but his eyes never left my father. How do you know my father's name, Mr. Henderson?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. The silence in the room suddenly felt heavier, charged with an unspoken question. Walter finally looked at me, a soft, almost wistful smile on his lips. "Arthur. Why, Arthur and I, we go way back. A very long way back indeed. I haven't seen him in years. Not since the old days." "The old days? What old days?" My father had always been in this town, always worked for his own company. His life, as far as I knew, was as transparent as glass. A chill snaked its way down my spine. "What old days are you referring to, Mr. Henderson?" I pressed, trying to keep my voice even, though my heart was beginning to thump against my ribs. Walter shuffled closer to the bed, his cane tapping softly on the linoleum floor. He reached out a trembling hand, hovering it gently over my father's arm, as if seeking connection. Arthur and we were in the service together. Korean War. Can you believe it? Young bucks, barely out of our teens, fighting for God and country. My breath hitched. The Korean War? My father had never spoken about serving in the military. Never. Not once in my entire life had he mentioned it. I knew he was of age, of course, but he always spoke of working right out of high school, taking over his father's small carpentry business, which eventually grew into Miller & Sons. It was a well-known family story, a narrative that had been woven into the fabric of our family for generations. The Korean War? I repeated, the words feeling foreign and heavy on my tongue. My father, he was in the military? Walter looked at me, his brow furrowed slightly. Yes, dear. A brave man. Your father. A very brave man. Saved my skin more than once, he did. You didn't know? The question hung in the air, thick with unspoken implications. My mind raced, trying to reconcile this sudden, monumental piece of information with everything I knew. My father, a veteran, a war hero. How could he have kept such a significant part of his life hidden for so long? It felt like a betrayal, a monumental omission that shook the very foundations of my understanding of him. If you had a parent who held such a secret, wouldn't you feel the ground shifting beneath your feet? No, I finally managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. He never mentioned it. Not to me, not to my mother, not to anyone. Walter's eyes softened, a deep sadness settling over them. Ah, yes. Arthur always was a private man. Kept his cards close to his chest, even back then. The things we saw, the things we did. Some men, they just don't talk about it. They bury it deep. I suppose Arthur was one of them. He paused, his gaze drifting back to my father's face. But he was there. We were there, together, in the thick of it. The Chosen Reservoir. You ever heard of it? The Chosen Reservoir. The name meant nothing to me, a distant echo from history textbooks I'd long forgotten. But the way Walter said it, the haunted look in his eyes, told me it was significant, a place etched into his memory with blood and ice. No, I said again, my voice trembling slightly. I haven't. Brutal, absolutely brutal, Walter murmured, shaking his head slowly. Fought against the Chinese, surrounded, freezing temperatures. Many good men lost their lives there. Arthur, he was a natural leader even then. Kept us alive, kept our spirits up when we thought all hope was lost. My father, a natural leader in a war I knew nothing about. The image clashed so violently with the quiet suburban man I knew. The one who meticulously tended his garden and spent his weekends tinkering in the garage. It was like looking at two different people, two entirely separate lives. He always told us he started his carpentry business right out of high school, I said, trying to grasp at the familiar, at the narrative I knew. Walter chuckled again, a knowing, almost melancholic sound. Well, he did, eventually, but not before a few years abroad, fighting for Uncle Sam. He came back a changed man, of course. We all did. But Arthur, he tried to build a new life, a quiet life, to forget the horrors he'd seen. I always respected him for that. He tried to build a new life, to forget. The words resonated with a painful clarity. Was this why he was always so quiet about his past, even about his own parents, who had died when he was relatively young? Was this secret, this military service, just the tip of an iceberg I never knew existed? The thought sent a shiver through me. If he could hide something as monumental as fighting in a war, what else had he kept from us? Walter continued, seemingly lost in his memories. He had a fire in him, Arthur did. A drive. After the war, he worked hard, saved every penny. He wanted something different, something better. And he got it. A beautiful wife, a lovely family, a successful business. He always talked about you, you know. His kids, said you were his pride and joy. He smiled at me, a genuine warmth in his eyes that briefly melted the ice forming around my heart. He did? I asked, a sudden surge of emotion catching in my throat. It was a small comfort, a familiar echo of the father I knew, amidst this startling new information. Oh, yes. Very proud. Used to show us pictures, even. Back in the day, after we got out. He'd visit me sometimes, when we were both trying to get back on our feet. We'd grab a beer, talk about the old times, but mostly about the future. His future. He had big plans. Walter paused, his gaze fixed on my father. He had a way about him, though, always drawing people in, made friends easily, even with the toughest crowds. But he never kept in touch with anyone from the war? I asked, genuinely confused. Or mentioned it to us. Walter sighed. Some things are better left unsaid, dear. For some men, the war was a burden, a shadow they carried alone. He wanted to protect you all from it, I imagine. But he was also, well, he had other connections too. Not just from the service. He knew a lot of people, Arthur did. All walks of life. The way he said other connections sent another jolt through me. It wasn't just the war now. There was a subtle shift in Walter's tone, a hint of something more, something undefined but unsettling. My father, a man of simple pleasures and predictable routines, suddenly felt like an enigma wrapped in a mystery. What kind of other connections? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. Walter seemed to hesitate, his eyes darting towards the door, then back to my father. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Well, dear. Arthur was always looking out for people, always lending a hand. He had a big heart, and sometimes a big heart leads you down interesting paths. He coughed, a dry, rattling sound. I really should be getting back to my room. Nurse will be looking for me. I couldn't believe it was him. Arthur. After all these years. He started to turn, shuffling towards the door. Wait, I exclaimed, a sense of urgency seizing me. I needed more. I needed answers. Mr. Henderson, please. What else do you know about my father? What paths are you talking about? He stopped, his hand resting on the doorframe, his back to me. He let out a long, slow breath, and when he finally turned, his eyes held a profound sadness, a weight of knowledge that made my stomach clench. Arthur. He had a different kind of life before he settled down here, Walter said, his voice barely audible. A life that many people, including perhaps your mother, would never understand. He helped people, yes. But sometimes, helping people means getting involved in things that are complicated. He wasn't always the man you knew, dear. Before the family, before this town, there was another Arthur, a man who moved in the shadows, making deals, pulling strings. He was a fixer, a problem solver, and he was very, very good at it. My mind reeled. A fixer? Pulling strings? The words painted a portrait of a stranger, a man who bore no resemblance to my gentle, honest father. The steady, dependable Arthur Miller. I cherished suddenly felt like a carefully constructed facade. The shock was physical, a cold wave washing over me, leaving me breathless. Walter looked at me, a deep empathy in his tired eyes. Your father. He did what he had to do, for survival, for others, and he left it all behind when he built this life with your mother. Or so I thought. He paused, then took a step back, opening the door wider. But sometimes, the past has a way of catching up, doesn't it? He offered me one last, sorrowful look, then quietly slipped out of the room, leaving me alone once again with the beeping machines and the unresponsive figure of my father. The silence that followed his departure was no longer empty. It was filled with the deafening roar of a secret life, of a man I realized I barely knew. My father, a fixer. A man who moved in the shadows. The thought was impossible, yet Walter's conviction, the raw emotion in his voice, made it terrifyingly real. My world had just shattered, and I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that this was only the beginning. Every instinct told me that Walter Henderson hadn't just stumbled into the wrong room. He had stumbled into my life to reveal a truth that would change everything. And that's when I saw a glint of something metal beneath my father's pillow, something clearly out of place in a hospital bed, something he must have clung to even in his unconscious state. My hand trembled as I reached for it, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, dreading what I would find. The metal object under the pillow was small, cold, and surprisingly heavy. My fingers closed around it, pulling it out from beneath the soft cotton. It wasn't a military dog tag, as I half expected, nor a religious medallion. It was a silver pocket watch, tarnished with age, its surface etched with an intricate swirling design that looked vaguely Celtic. I flipped it open, and instead of a clock face, there was a faded, sepia-toned photograph of a woman I didn't recognize, her face obscured by the passage of time and wear. Her features were delicate, her eyes dark, and she wore a soft, melancholic smile. On the opposite side, beneath the empty space where the clock hands should have been, was a tiny, almost invisible engraving. 2 a.m. Always. L. L. Who was L? And why was this watch, clearly not my mother's, hidden with such reverence beneath my father's pillow? The delicate weight of the watch felt like a stone in my palm, dragging me deeper into this bewildering abyss of secrets. My father, the bedrock of my world, was crumbling before my eyes, piece by painful piece. I stared at the woman's faded image, her identity a ghost from a past I never knew existed. Was this Elle? A lover? A partner in some forgotten venture? The thought was a fresh stab, twisting the knife Walter had already plunged into my heart. Not just a war veteran, but a man with a secret past, a fixer, and perhaps a secret love. My carefully constructed reality, built on decades of what I believed was an open, honest relationship with my father, was dissolving like smoke. I slipped the watch into my pocket, the cold metal a constant reminder against my thigh. Sleep was now an impossibility. The rhythm of the machines, once a dull hum, now felt like a taunt. Each beep a question mark. Who was he, Sarah? Who was he, really? The first rays of dawn were just painting the sky a bruised purple when I finally stumbled out of the room, needing air, needing space, needing to escape the suffocating weight of my father's unspoken life. I found a quiet waiting area, deserted at this early hour, and pulled out my phone. Michael. He was my brother, my blood. Surely he'd know something, anything, to make sense of this. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. Sarah? Everything okay? Is Dad? He's the same, Michael. I cut him off, my voice sharp, raw with emotion. But something's happened. Something unbelievable. I recounted Walter's story, my words tumbling out in a rush, desperate to share the burden. The Korean War, a fixer, the pocket watch, the anonymous L. I left nothing out, watching his reaction through the phone line, waiting for his disbelief, his shared confusion. There was a long silence on the other end, so long I thought the call had dropped. Michael? Are you there? Yeah, I'm here, Sarah, he finally said, his voice strangely subdued, lacking the shock I expected. Listen, about the war. Dad did mention it, once or twice, when I was a kid. Said he served but didn't want to talk about it. Called it Ancient history. I just figured it was a common enough thing for men of his generation. Never thought much of it. My blood ran cold. He told you? And you never mentioned it to me? Or Mom? It wasn't a big deal, Sarah. Just a passing comment, he insisted, though his tone held a defensive edge. He clearly didn't want to dwell on it. What was I supposed to do? Interrogate him? But it was a big deal. A massive, gaping hole in our family history. And the fact that Michael had known, even vaguely, and kept it to himself, felt like another small betrayal. If you've ever felt the sting of a secret kept within your own family, especially one that reshapes your entire understanding of a loved one, you'll understand the quiet fury that began to simmer inside me. And what about the fixer part? The shadows. Does that ring any bells, Michael? I pushed, my voice tighter now. Another pause. Look, Dad was always a resourceful guy, right? Knew a lot of people. Had a knack for getting things done. He built a business from scratch. Maybe Walter was just talking about his early entrepreneurial days, navigating a tough world after the war. People sometimes stretch the truth, Sarah, especially old men in hospitals. His explanation felt too rehearsed, too dismissive, and the pocket watch, Michael, with L engraved on it, a woman's picture inside. Does that sound like entrepreneurial days to you? I demanded. This time his silence was profound. A watch? Sarah, you need to calm down. You're exhausted. You're seeing things. Dad loves Mom. You know that. This is just a misunderstanding. Maybe it was a souvenir from the war. A friend's family heirloom. His reluctance to engage, his quick dismissal of what I found, only cemented my suspicion. He was hiding something, or at least minimizing it. My brother, always the pragmatic one, now sounded evasive. I need to go, Michael, I said, my voice flat. I'll call you later. Or not. I hung up before he could respond, a fresh wave of loneliness washing over me. Now, even my own brother felt like a stranger, part of the conspiracy of silence. The morning nurses bustled in, checking my father's vitals, offering soft smiles. Dr. Evans stopped by, his face still etched with fatigue. The news was grim, unchanged. My father was still clinging to life, but barely. His body was failing, even as his secrets were beginning to surface. The irony was almost unbearable. He was dying, and in his vulnerability, he was finally revealing the truth of who he was, or at least, who he had been. I spent the next few hours in a daze, the pocket watch a heavy presence in my pocket. I kept replaying Walter's words, trying to make sense of a man who moved in the shadows, making deals, pulling strings. My father? The man who clipped coupons and volunteered at the church bazaar? It was impossible. And yet, Walter's conviction, the haunted look in his eyes, felt undeniably real. Around midday, after my mother had come and gone, her grief a tangible shroud around her, I decided I couldn't sit there any longer without action. I needed to find Walter Henderson. He was my only lead, my only connection to this other Arthur. I found his room, 214, exactly where he'd said. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open gently. The room was empty. The bed was stripped, the hospital gown folded neatly on the bedside table. My heart sank. Had he been discharged already? It had only been a few hours. A passing nurse, a kind woman with bright red hair, noticed my confusion. Looking for someone, dear? Yes, Walter Henderson, from room 214. She paused, her brow furrowing. Walter Henderson? Oh, he was moved, dear. Early this morning. He took a turn for the worse after his procedure. Respiratory issues. They moved him to the critical care wing on the 3rd floor. Room 307. I hear he's not doing very well. Critical care. Just like my father. The coincidence was unsettling. I thanked her, my mind racing. Another door closing, perhaps, but also a new, more urgent path opening. If I wanted answers from Walter, I had to act quickly. Up on the 3rd floor, the atmosphere was even more hushed, more sterile. The air felt heavy with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken prayers. I found room 307. Walter was hooked up to even more machines than my father, his breathing shallow and labored, an oxygen mask covering most of his face. He looked frail, even more so than before, his wispy white hair a stark contrast to the stark white sheets. I approached his bed slowly, my shadow falling over him. His eyes, though clouded, seemed to flicker open at my presence. He struggled to lift a hand, a weak gesture towards me. "Mr. Henderson?" I whispered, leaning in close. "It's Sarah, Arthur Miller's daughter." A faint smile touched his lips, or at least I imagined it did beneath the oxygen mask. His eyes held a familiar warmth, but also a new urgency, a fear I hadn't seen before. "The watch," I said, pulling it from my pocket and holding it up for him to see. "Do you know anything about this? Who is Elle?" He coughed, a dry, painful sound. He tried to speak, but only a raspy groan escaped. He pointed a trembling finger at the watch, then made a vague gesture with his other hand, a sweeping motion, as if indicating distance or time. Then he pointed to the photo, his eyes wide with meaning. "She was important, wasn't she?" I pressed, a cold dread seeping into my bones. Who was she to my father? He nodded, slowly, painfully. He struggled for air, his chest heaving. It was clear he was trying to tell me something important. He pointed again, this time at himself, then at my father, and then back at the watch, his eyes fixed on the L. He seemed to be trying to convey a connection, a shared past, but with her. Suddenly he gripped my wrist, his strength surprising given his condition. His eyes bored into mine, filled with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. He mumbled something, a string of garbled sounds through the oxygen mask. I leaned closer, straining to hear. "Pigeon. Post," was all I could make out, followed by another name, half whispered, half gasped. "Silas. Pigeon Post? Silas?" I repeated, utterly bewildered. What did any of this mean? Was he delirious? He squeezed my wrist again, harder this time, his gaze pleading. Then, with a final shuddering breath, his hand went limp. The monitors beside his bed began to shriek, a cacophony of alarms. Nurses rushed in, their faces grim, pushing me gently away. "Code blue. Get the crash cart," one yelled. I stumbled back, watching in horror as they began chest compressions, their movements frantic, desperate. Walter Henderson, the man who held the key to my father's hidden life, was slipping away before my eyes, taking his secrets with him. Pigeon Post. Silas. The words echoed in my mind, meaningless and terrifying. I left the critical care wing in a daze, the shrieking alarm still ringing in my ears. Walter was gone. His death felt like a deliberate act, a door slamming shut just as I was about to walk through it. What had he been trying to tell me? What was the significance of Elle, of Pigeon Post, of Silas? Back in my father's room, the silence felt even more oppressive. I sat down, clutching the watch, feeling utterly alone. My father lay there unconscious, holding the answers, yet utterly unreachable. My brother was evasive, my mother oblivious. I was on my own. I pulled out the watch again, examining the faded photo of Elle. Her eyes. There was something familiar about them, a quiet strength, a hint of sadness. I flipped the watch over, running my thumb over the Celtic engraving. It wasn't just decorative, it was a specific knot, an endless loop. What did it signify? Loyalty? An unbreakable bond? As I stared at the photo, a memory flickered, a faint echo from my childhood. I must have been no older than 7 or 8. I remembered finding an old photo album tucked away in my father's workshop, hidden beneath some dusty tools. It wasn't our family album, but one filled with older, darker pictures. My father had found me, looking through it, and had snatched it away, his face unusually stern. He'd rarely raised his voice to me, but that day he had. "That's not yours, Sarah. You mustn't touch those." I'd been so surprised by his intensity that I'd never dared to ask about it again, the incident fading into the background of a forgotten childhood moment. Until now. The workshop. It was my father's sanctuary, a place he kept meticulously organized, but also deeply private. He rarely let anyone but himself clean or rearrange his tools. Could that old album still be there? Could it hold more clues? I glanced at my father's inert form. I couldn't leave him. Not really. But a desperate urge, an almost manic energy seized me. I needed to know. I needed answers more than I needed sleep. I called a nurse, asking if she could keep an eye on him for an hour or so, promising to be back. She gave me a weary but sympathetic nod. The drive home felt surreal. The familiar streets, the quaint houses, the perfectly manicured lawns. It all felt like a thin veneer over a hidden world. Our house, the house my father had built and lived in for decades, suddenly felt like a place I barely knew. I let myself in, the silence of the empty house amplifying my anxiety. My mother was still at the hospital, or perhaps with a friend. I headed straight for the workshop, a small detached building behind the garage. The key was on its usual hook inside the kitchen. The air in the workshop was thick with the familiar scents of sawdust, oil, and old wood, my father's essence. Tools hung in orderly rows, workbenches were spotless. Everything was just as he kept it. But where would he hide something like an old photo album? I remembered him pulling it from under something. I started with his main workbench, carefully moving stacks of lumber, empty paint cans, and assorted hardware. Nothing. I checked behind cabinets, under the floorboards, even inside old toolboxes. Frustration began to mount. Had he gotten rid of it? Had my childhood memory been faulty? Then, I noticed a loose panel at the back of a built-in shelving unit, hidden behind a stack of old blueprints. My heart hammered. It wasn't obvious, but there was a faint seam, almost imperceptible. I pressed on it, and with a soft click, a small compartment swung open. Inside, nestled in a velvet bag, was not a photo album, but a small, locked wooden box. Carved into its lid was the same Celtic knot design as on the pocket watch. The irony of finding a locked box, after being told my father was a fixer who pulled strings, was not lost on me. He solved problems, but created mysteries. I tried the watch's winding stem. Too small. My keys. No luck. I felt a surge of despair. How could I open this? Was I doomed to find secrets only to be blocked by another layer of obfuscation? Then I remembered something else about the workshop, something specific to him. My father was a man who believed in having the right tool for every job. He also believed in redundancy. I rummaged through a small drawer in his main workbench, the one where he kept all his odd bits and bobs, his just-in-case items. And there it was, a tiny ornate skeleton key, nestled amongst old screws and forgotten washers. It felt strangely ceremonial, almost theatrical. My hand trembled as I inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a soft, satisfying click. I lifted the lid. Inside, the box was lined with faded blue silk, and within, a treasure trove of another life. There was a stack of yellowed letters, tied with a thin, brittle ribbon, a handful of old, blurry photographs, mostly of groups of young men, some in military uniform, some in civilian clothes, all looking tough and world-weary. In one photo, my father, impossibly young, stood arm in arm with Walter Henderson, both grinning, a mischievous glint in their eyes. Next to them, a tall, imposing man with piercing eyes and a serious demeanor. Could this be Silas? But it was the next item that truly made my breath catch in my throat. Beneath the letters and photos was a folded newspaper clipping, brittle and brown with age. The headline, in bold, stark type, read, "Local businessman vanishes amidst rumors of debt and despair." The date was from over 50 years ago, long before I was born. The article detailed the disappearance of a prominent but financially troubled man named Silas Blackwood, a real estate developer in a nearby city. It mentioned unconventional business practices and connections to less than reputable individuals. My father, Arthur Miller, and Silas Blackwood, Walter Henderson, Pigeon Post. The pieces, though still fragmented, were beginning to form a terrifying mosaic. My father wasn't just a veteran, not just a fixer. He was involved in something far deeper, far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The picture of Silas Blackwood in the paper was unmistakably the same man from the photograph with my father and Walter. He hadn't just vanished amidst rumors. This felt like something Arthur might have been involved in. But there was more in the box. Below the clipping was a small, crudely drawn map on parchment, filled with cryptic markings and symbols I didn't understand. And underneath that, a thick ledger, bound in worn leather, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting, my father's handwriting. Not his construction company accounts, but columns of dates, names, figures, and what looked like codes. A veritable accounting of a shadow life. Each entry seemed to describe a job or a favor. The sums were substantial, and some of the names were crossed out, others underlined. And then, nestled at the very bottom, beneath everything else, was a small folded piece of paper. It was a letter, addressed to me, in my father's familiar hand. My name, Sarah, written with a flourish he usually reserved for official documents. It was dated a year ago. A letter he had written, knowing something was coming, knowing he might not have the chance to tell me himself. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped the box. He had known. He had prepared. All this time he had carried this burden, these secrets, and had made a contingency plan, a plan for me to find it. I pulled out the letter, my heart hammering against my ribs, dread and a strange sense of exhilaration warring within me. This was it, the truth, the answer to everything. But as I unfolded the paper, my eyes scanning the first lines, a chilling realization washed over me. It wasn't just a confession. It was a warning. "My dearest Sarah," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer able to protect you. The life I built for us, the quiet, safe existence, was always a carefully constructed wall against the past. A past that, I fear, is now crumbling. Walter helped me keep it buried for decades, a favor I can never repay. But now, they are coming. For me, or for what I knew. And because you are my daughter, my steadfast Sarah, the one who always sees too much, they may come for you too. There are things I did, people I helped, and people I crossed. This ledger contains the proof. And the map. The map shows where I hid the leverage, the one thing that can buy your safety. Find it, Sarah, before they do. And never trust a man named..." The letter abruptly cut off, smudged and torn at the very end, as if he had been interrupted, or had run out of time, or perhaps even strength. The name, the crucial name of the man I should never trust, was gone. Just a blank, ragged edge where the paper had ripped. My father, the gentle, dependable man, had been living a life of quiet danger, and now that danger was reaching out for me. The heart attack, the sudden collapse. Was it merely a medical event, or something far more sinister? Was someone else looking for these secrets, this leverage, this map, this ledger? The image of Walter Henderson's terrified eyes, his dying whispers of Silas and Pigeon Post, flashed through my mind. It wasn't just old war stories. It was a tangled web of lies, and now I was caught right in the middle of it. I looked at the crumpled letter in my hand, then at the wooden box overflowing with my father's hidden life. My father, my rock, had placed a target on my back, and the man who was meant to protect me was lying unconscious in a hospital bed, perhaps no longer able to. I was alone, armed with a cryptic map, a coded ledger, and a dying man's warning. My entire world had been turned upside down, and I suddenly felt a cold, predatory gaze on me, even in the stillness of the workshop. The game, whatever it was, had begun, and I was clearly playing for stakes I couldn't even begin to comprehend. The letter, my father's familiar script blurring through my tears, crumbled in my shaking hand. They are coming. For me, or for what I knew. And because you are my daughter, my steadfast Sarah, the one who always sees too much, they may come for you too. There are things I did, people I helped, and people I crossed. This ledger contains the proof, and the map. The map shows where I hid the leverage, the one thing that can buy your safety. Find it, Sarah, before they do, and never trust a man named. The torn edge stared back at me, a gaping wound where the truth should have been. The name, the most crucial piece of the puzzle, was gone. Panic, raw, and visceral, seized me. My father wasn't just a secret war hero or a charming rogue who helped people. He was tangled in something dangerous, something that had haunted him for decades, and now it was reaching for me. I gripped the wooden box, its silk lining a cruel contrast to the brutal reality it contained. My eyes darted around the workshop, suddenly no longer a sanctuary, but a potential target. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, every creak of the old house echoed with menace. I wasn't just Sarah, the dutiful daughter, anymore. I was a protagonist in a story I never knew existed, a story penned in secrets and danger, and I was utterly unprepared. The ledger lay open, its pages filled with my father's meticulous handwriting. Dates, locations, codes, names, some familiar from our small town, others completely alien. What was Pigeon Post? Was it a location? A person? A method? And Silas Blackwood, the man from the newspaper clipping, the local businessman who vanished. He was the nexus, the origin point of this hidden life. My father had written this letter a year ago. A year of knowing this threat was imminent. A year of silent preparation. While I, oblivious, had complained about grocery prices and my latest office woes. The weight of his burden, and his decision to carry it alone, pressed down on me. I couldn't stay here. The house felt exposed. I gathered the box, the ledger, the map, the letters, the watch, and the clipping, stuffing them into my backpack. My mind raced, trying to find a safe haven, the hospital. It was public, secure, and I needed to be near my father. And Michael. I needed Michael, regardless of his evasiveness. The drive back to St. Jude's was a blur of heightened senses. Every car behind me felt like a pursuer, every glance from a pedestrian a potential threat. I was seeing the world through my father's eyes now, a world where danger lurked beneath the veneer of suburban calm. I burst into my father's room, startling the afternoon nurse. I barely registered her concerned look, my gaze fixed on my father, still and pale in the bed, a symbol of the fragile peace he had fought so hard to maintain. My phone rang, a jarring sound in the quiet room. It was Michael. I hesitated, then answered. "Michael," I whispered, my voice tight. "You need to come here. Now. It's not just Dad. It's everything." There was a pause, a breath held. "Sarah, what are you talking about? I just spoke to Mom. She said Dad's stable, no change." "It's not about his condition," I retorted, the words tumbling out. "It's about his life, and I found a box, Michael. A hidden box. A ledger. A map. A letter. And a warning. From Dad. He said they are coming. And the letter, it's torn. The name of the man I can't trust is missing. Michael, he wasn't just a veteran. He was a fixer, a problem solver. And Walter Henderson. He's dead. A sharp intake of breath. Walter? Dead? Sarah, what did you do? His voice was laced with a fear I hadn't heard before, a raw edge of genuine terror that sent a fresh wave of dread through me. I didn't do anything, I snapped, frustration bubbling over. He was in critical care, like Dad. He died trying to tell me something. Pigeon post. Silas. What does that mean, Michael? Who is Silas Blackwood? Why did Dad keep all of this hidden? And why did you keep it from me? Another long silence. Then, a ragged sigh. I'm on my way, Sarah. I'll be there as fast as I can. Don't touch anything else. Don't talk to anyone. The line clicked dead. I looked at my father, helpless and vulnerable. He was still here, but a stranger in so many ways. The silence in the room stretched, heavy and expectant. I pulled the ledger from my backpack, my fingers tracing the precise columns. Pigeon post. It sounded like a code name, a system. A soft knock on the door. My head snapped up. It wasn't Michael. It was a man, mid-50s, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his silver hair neatly combed. His eyes, though, were cold, assessing, utterly devoid of warmth. He held a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sarah Miller, I presume? He asked, his voice smooth, cultured, yet chilling. My apologies for the intrusion. My name is Mr. Thorne. I represent a certain interest. I believe your father, Mr. Miller, was in possession of some rather sensitive materials that belonged to my employer. My blood ran cold. They were here. So quickly. The torn letter's warning echoed in my mind. Never trust a man named... Had Thorne been the missing name? I don't know what you're talking about, I lied, my voice wavering despite my attempt at strength. My hand instinctively tightened around my backpack, where the box and ledger were hidden. Thorne chuckled, a low, humorless sound. Oh, I think you do, Miss Miller. Your father was a very clever man, a very cautious man. He had a knack for solving problems, and sometimes for creating them. He also had a soft spot for certain people. A weakness, if you will. And sometimes those weaknesses leave loose ends. He glanced pointedly at my unconscious father. And now, it seems, you are his loose end. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. We know about the old man, Walter, and his unfortunate demise. A tragedy, really. But some things are best left buried, wouldn't you agree? Your father chose to bury his past. He built a beautiful life here. A shame to see it unravel, wouldn't it be? For you, for your mother, for your brother? The implicit threat hung heavy in the air. He knew about Michael. He knew about my mother. He knew how to hit me where it hurt. What do you want? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, a desperate plea for clarity. The leverage, Miss Miller, Thorne stated, his voice now flat, devoid of any pretense of cordiality. The ledger, the map, whatever else Arthur may have squirreled away. We know he kept an insurance policy, a very powerful one, and we are here to collect it. Just then, the door burst open. Michael stood there, breathless, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and fury. Get away from her, he snarled, stepping protectively in front of me, his body rigid with adrenaline. Thorne's smile didn't waver. Ah, the prodigal son. Michael, isn't it? Arthur always said you were the pragmatic one. Perhaps you can make your sister see reason. This isn't a game, children. This is serious business. And your father played a very dangerous game for a very long time. He was helping people, I interjected, my voice rising. He saved people from men like you." Thorne let out a short, dismissive laugh. Arthur Miller was many things. A hero, a villain, a ghost, but always a survivor. He made a name for himself, not just as a carpenter, but as a man who could make problems disappear. And Silas Blackwood was his biggest problem, and his greatest triumph. He made Silas disappear, all right. Disappear from the world, and from the people who wanted to exploit him. But Arthur kept the record. He always kept a record. A bad habit for a fixer. "Silas Blackwood wasn't just a businessman, Sarah," Michael said, his voice strained. "He was a loan shark, a mob enforcer, running protection rackets. He was a monster. Dad got involved trying to save a woman. Elle." My breath hitched. "Elle?" "Lydia," Michael confirmed, his eyes fixed on Thorne. "Silas's wife. She was being abused, trapped. Dad helped her escape, helped her disappear. He created a new identity for her. He loved her, Sarah. She was his first love, before Mom. He saved her life, but he couldn't save her from the disease that took her a few years later. The watch was hers. That's why he kept it." My mind reeled. Lydia, my father's first love, a woman he saved from a monster, a silent, enduring testament to a different kind of heroism. The pieces clicked into place, agonizingly, beautifully. The sadness in the faded photograph, the Celtic knot, a symbol of endless love and loyalty. "And Silas?" I asked, tears stinging my eyes. "What happened to him?" "He didn't just vanish," Thorne interjected, his voice laced with menace. "Arthur staged his disappearance, made it look like he'd fled, in debt, shamed. But he also put a target on Silas's back, using the leverage Arthur kept. He fed information to Silas's rivals, ensuring Silas would be hunted, neutralized, without Arthur ever laying a hand on him. A clean job, as Arthur would say. But the leverage, the proof of Silas's crimes and Arthur's involvement, that's what we want. It implicates a lot of powerful people. People who wanted Silas gone, and people who helped Arthur do it. My employer is one of them. We want to tie up these loose ends, once and for all." "And Pigeon Post?" I asked, looking at Michael. It was their code name for a network of safe houses and informants. Old veterans like Walter, who owed Dad favors, or who believed in what he was doing. "A secret network for people in trouble," Michael explained, his gaze still locked on Thorne. "A hidden sanctuary." Thorne clapped his hands softly, a chilling sound in the sterile room. "Enough nostalgia. The leverage, Miss Miller. Now, or we make sure your family's quiet suburban life becomes very, very loud, and very, very short." I looked at Michael, then at my father, then back at Thorne. I could hand over the box, let these men erase my father's past, his sacrifice, or I could fight. My father's letter, his warning, gave me courage. He hadn't just left me a burden, he had left me a weapon and a choice. He had trusted me. "The map leads to a place," I said, a sudden clarity washing over me. "A safe deposit box. In an old bank downtown. It's under a pseudonym. A. Miller. Only the A isn't Arthur. It's Anya. Anya Blackwood, Lydia's maiden name. She opened it before she disappeared, and Dad kept it updated. It was a gamble, a bluff. I had no idea if the map led to a bank, or if Anya was even a real name linked to it. But the words felt right, a gut instinct. Thorne's eyes flickered, a momentary tremor in his composure. Anya Blackwood? A bank? Arthur was always full of surprises. He considered me, a new respect, or perhaps a new calculation in his gaze. Very well. Give me the coordinates, Miss Miller, and the key. We go together. No, I said, shaking my head. The key is the Celtic knot on the watch. It opens the box. The contents are coded. Only I know how to decipher my father's hand, and only I know the full story of what's not in the ledger, the names he intentionally left out. Names that protect his network, his pigeon post. Names that could cause a lot of trouble for a lot of powerful people if they were to fall into the wrong hands. Names that Thorne's employer might not want exposed. It was a bold move, a dangerous one. I was gambling with my life, with my family's safety. But I was my father's daughter, the steady, dependable Arthur Miller. And now, the resilient, cunning Arthur Miller. Thorne stared at me for a long, tense moment. He saw the fire in my eyes, the newfound resolve. He saw Arthur's daughter. "You are more like your father than you know," he finally said, a grudging admiration in his voice. "All right. We go. You, me, and your brother. But any tricks, Miss Miller, and your father's quiet life will be the least of your concerns." And so, under the harsh fluorescent lights of St. Jude's, a deal was struck. A clandestine journey began, not for money or power, but for truth, for protection, and for the peace that my father had so desperately sought. The old bank building stood derelict, slated for demolition. Thorne and two of his silent, hulking associates, along with Michael and me, navigated the dust-filled, echoing halls. The map, when deciphered with the ledger's codes, led not to a standard vault, but to a hidden, bricked-up alcove in the bank's abandoned archives. My father, the builder, had literally hidden his secrets within the walls of a forgotten past. I retrieved a small, unassuming metal box, its contents meticulously preserved. Copies of Silas Blackwood's most heinous financial dealings, notarized confessions from his victims, coded names of corrupt officials he had bribed, and a comprehensive timeline of his disappearance, detailing how Arthur had masterminded it. There was also a final poignant letter from Lydia L. to Arthur, expressing her gratitude, her love, and her understanding of his sacrifice. She had passed peacefully, safe and free, thanks to him. I handed the box to Thorne. He opened it, scanned the documents, his face unreadable. He knew this was the real deal. He had what he came for. "A cunning man, your father," he said, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "He protected his people, and he buried his enemies. He was one of a kind." As Thorne and his men melted back into the shadows from which they came, leaving us in the dusty silence, Michael finally broke down. "He always told me he was trying to protect Mom and you," he confessed, tears streaming down his face. "He said the world he lived in was too dark for you both. He promised me he'd left it all behind, but he asked me to keep an eye out, to be ready if anyone ever came looking. He said if anything ever happened to him, I needed to make sure you were safe. I never wanted to believe it was real. I'm so sorry, Sarah." I hugged my brother, our shared fear and the weight of our father's secret finally uniting us. "He was protecting all of us, Michael," I said, a deep well of understanding filling my heart. "Even you. And he gave us the tools to protect ourselves in the end. He was always there, even when we didn't know it." We returned to the hospital, exhausted but profoundly changed. My father's room, once a prison of sterile loneliness, now felt like a sacred space, filled with the echoes of a life lived with fierce loyalty and quiet courage. A few days later, my father's heart, strong enough to survive a war and a lifetime of secrets, finally gave out. He passed peacefully in his sleep, the rhythmic beeping of the monitors silencing into a long, flat line. My mother wept, inconsolable. Michael and I stood beside her, our hands linked, a silent pact of shared knowledge and shared love. I placed the silver pocket watch, Lydia's watch, into my father's hand before they took him away. His secret love, a symbol of the life he left behind, but also the catalyst for the man he became. I knew then that Arthur Miller wasn't a contradiction, but a man of profound duality. The war hero, the fixer, the man who loved two women, the quiet suburban father, the pillar of the community. All of it was him. All of it was real. The truth hadn't brought neat answers or a perfectly symmetrical narrative. It had brought complexity, shadows, and a chilling understanding of the world my father had navigated. But it had also brought something else: peace. Peace in understanding his sacrifices, peace in knowing the depth of his love, and peace in realizing that his quiet life was not a facade, but a profound act of self-preservation and protection. He had built a wall around us, not to deceive, but to safeguard. I looked at my mother, her grief still raw but softened by Michael and me. I looked at Michael, no longer distant, but standing shoulder to shoulder with me. Our family had endured. We had faced the shadows, and we had emerged, battered but whole. The experience had changed me, transformed me from the dutiful daughter into a woman forged by fire, capable of seeing the nuanced truth behind the polished surfaces of life. My father had not just built houses. He had built a life, brick by brick, secret by secret, love by love. And in doing so, he had given me the ultimate inheritance. Not just a legacy, but the wisdom to understand it. The truth, in all its messy, imperfect glory, had brought peace, not perfection. And for that, I was eternally grateful.